everybody, and thanks for joining our weekly podcast. I'm Robin Lewis, founder and CEO of the Robin Report, which, by the way, is really more than just a daily report. We believe that we have great strategic insights into all sectors of the retail industry. We got expert writers, and we connect the dots. We just aren't a newsletter. We are strategic insights, and we talk about the impact of major events in the industry, the impact they have on the particular company we're talking about, their competitors, and so forth. So it really goes deep into the business. So it's a knowledge platform from which, as I mentioned, we communicate thought leadership on various strategic topics through our reports, but also these podcasts, webinars, and hopefully live events in the future. And along with our chief strategist, Shelley Cohan, who, by the way, is also a professor at FIT and Syracuse University, we welcome you to our conversation on the topic of Amazon 2.0, a new view of its miscalculation. Shelley, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the possibility that Amazon's retail business may be slipping into maturity. That, of course, that dreaded plateau on the bell curve where growth flattens before it hits the inevitable decline curve down to death. Anyway, we did acknowledge that the recent downturn might be a leading indication of Amazon entering maturity, which is slower growth and not just a speed bump. Another indication was Andy Jassy being anointed CEO. And I made the point that maybe they realized the commonly held belief that an entrepreneur, and that would be Jeff Bezos, can launch a brilliant business that scales like a rocket, which it did. But at some point, the business gets too big to manage for the innovator or the entrepreneur, who then, at the right time, needs to turn the helm over to a professional manager, which Jassy could be described as, since he was the founder and headed up Amazon's AWS, which is Amazon's most profitable business. I think it's something like 75% of operating profits.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's Amazon's web services. So we speculated that since he had no retail experience, and one of his first moves was to shut down most of their physical retail initiatives, and we speculated that, yes, they were not growing, those physical retail stores were not growing. And perhaps that was simply his strategy to focus on other parts of the business that had more and faster runways, certainly AWS, but then there's advertising.
Right.
Yep, growing like crazy. And you had some big numbers on that and other parts of the business. So I get more convinced that one of the reasons none of their physical store initiatives are growing, and I posit that Amazon style will fail, my opinion only, is that throughout their senior and the reason being is that throughout their senior and C-level teams, there is little to no physical retail experience, which is phenomenal to me. And I went through the board of directors and their top C and senior level teams. Nobody in there has legacy retail experience.
Right.
So, but now, Shelley, another event that took place after our podcast, the departure of David Clark, who was the CEO of Worldwide Consumer for just over a year, that short period of time. But he had been in various senior roles at Amazon since 1999. But as CEO of Amazon's worldwide consumer business, Clark's work entailed overseeing various key units, including online stores, physical stores, the marketplace of third-party sellers, and the Amazon Prime subscription business. And guess what, Shelley? Clark had no retail experience. So one might suggest that his reason for departing was in realizing that the mess he inherited might be a death knell for him anyway. So why not get out of Dodge?
Well, I mean, I think the CEO, Dave Clark, is gone not because of his lack of retail experience, but I think there's been a series of failures, including the warehouse overexpansion that you mentioned. We'll talk about that more in detail, overstaffing, rising costs. And I'm telling you, Robin, losing that union vote in New York, which we had a whole nother podcast on, was a big deal. And Amazon actually acknowledged that the excess warehouse and logistics capacity that they have been building out for the past 2 years would contribute $10 billion in costs for the first half of 2022.
Unbelievable.
So Amazon stock price was hovering around 180 a year ago when Jassy became CEO. And now in June, it's dropped to 108. And, you know, working with Jeff Bezos was different than working with Andy Jassy. From my understanding, Bezos gave a lot of autonomy. He's this, you know, innovative, creative kind of thinking guy. And Jassy's used to managing, you know, techie software group and, you know, details. And so it was actually reported in the Wall Street Journal that Clark was a little bit tired of Jassy's day-to-day hands-on style of managing.
Yeah, that could be.
You know, Jassy's managing his direct reports more closely than Bezos did, and perhaps Clark, as we kind of got the hint to there. And other management departures are based on this kind of change in management style. And it's certainly a consideration. We've seen this, Robin, and when managers, you know, change alongside when leadership changes in retail, when CEOs change. But, you know, Clark had been with Amazon for 20 years.
Yeah.
And his pay was $56 million, which was up from $46 million last year. Most of it's stock awards. You know, his salary is like $175,000. So yeah, he's one of the highest paid Amazon employees. And incredible. Here's a fun fact, Robin, that you'll think is interesting. He joined Amazon out of grad school. So imagine your first job paying you $56 million.
Well, that never happened.
Well, we know Amazon's business is slowing in terms of online sales. They were down 1% for Q1. They also built all these warehouses and hired all these workers when demand was, you know, up 40%. So just to kind of give a recap of Amazon's growth. So when we look at year 2020, Amazon had a stellar year. Net profits were up 84%. Sales hit $386 billion, 38% over 2019. Then in 2021, sales were $470 billion, and that was up 22%. So a little bit of a decline from previous year, understandable. But most recently in Q1, consolidated sales for Amazon were only up 7%. So clearly the growth is slowing. Yep.
Well, Shelley, first of all, Clark won the lottery, right? I mean, give me a break. But back to his lack of retail experience, I agree that he didn't leave because of that alone. I agree with that. But to clarify, Clark took the helm of their physical retail while those businesses were stumbling along. And I believe all of a sudden, with no retail experience and it would be his responsibility to estimate not only global growth that had been complicated by the worldwide pandemic and the supply chain collapse, and along with that, how many DCs would need to be built out based on growth, or worse, how many should be shut down or stopped in the middle of contracted construction. You know, Shelley, it is not a stretch to posit that Clark says to himself, I certainly would, who needs this mess when he's got 56 million bucks? Anyway, I mean, I think it's possible. Anyway, of course, Amazon's surge during COVID was not what they should have based their future infrastructure needs on.
Right.
So Shelley, do you have some numbers on Amazon's estimated overbuilding and some sense of what a disaster it might be?
Well, I mean, during the pandemic, Amazon's inventory management system was projecting demand based on the pandemic levels, but the company didn't have the capacity to put through the forecasted demand. So in order to meet demand, the company decided it's going to build all these warehouses and warehouse capacity. But the problem is it takes over a year and up to 2 years to actually build out the actual warehouse capacity and logistics. So here we are in 2022, and right about now, we have all this capacity, but as I shared with you a second ago, not enough demand slowing down. And what I think is really ironic is that Bezos called his inventory forecast. He has this internal forecasting system that they built internally called Scott's Supply Chain Optimization Technologies. Bezos called it his quote unquote secret weapon. Well, the secret weapon that over forecasted put the company in peril is coming back to bite them a bit.
Yep.
The other issue is that Amazon had to hire a lot of workers during the pandemic to keep up with the pace of demand. So it essentially doubled its workforce in 2020 to more than 1.6 million people. It's the second largest employer, private employer. And what's interesting is that they actually hired more people than there were jobs because workers would get sick with COVID. They'd be out for 2 weeks. And so they had to hire more people to make up for the people that were sick. And then everyone came back. So in 2022, demand slowing, you have all the workers that were sick that are back, and all the workers that you hired when people were sick are back. So you have too many warehouses, more workers than you need right now. And the ones that were hired during this whole process are all now back to work. So Amazon's kind of stopping the build out of the warehouses. It's also, which is interesting, it's putting aside building. They had this plan to build these state-of-the-art robotic warehouses, which I think is a mistake because I think it's going to put them behind competitors to put that on hold. But it plans to try to lease out the overabundance of warehouse space that it has to the tune of, they had 10 million square feet of space that they're trying to lease out.
Unbelievable.
And of course, Amazon's going to try to get out of its own leases if it can.
Oh boy. Yeah. It's, you know, as Phil said earlier, Phil is our IT guy. Anyway, as he said earlier in a podcast that we did, you know, these retailers, and it's true, when they're scaling at a rocket, you know, pace, like Amazon did, you know, they start throwing millions of dollars around. Well, let's build more warehouses. Let's do this. Let's do that. And they don't worry about the comeuppance at some point in time because they're making so much money. Well, this may be Amazon's time to get their comeuppance unless Jassy can figure out what to do. Anyway, along with this mess, Shelley, Clark would have to have developed a strategy to reposition their existing physical stores, which, by the way, Jassy made the decision for him by essentially closing a good number of their physical stores other than Whole Foods. And I think the other grocery related stores that they have, which also may be telling as to what Jassy's plan is for expansion of physical stores. Does that mean a focus on grocery?
Well, interesting. Well, I know you don't believe in Amazon's run at physical retail, but Jassy was very, very positive in a recent press release. He said, I remain very optimistic about our stores business, and we believe we are in the early days of what's possible.
Well, Shelley, wait a second. What do you expect him to say? Go on.
I know. He says that Amazon only represents about 1% of the worldwide retail market segment, and 85% of that worldwide market is in physical stores. He says, if you believe that equation can change over time, which he does, there's a lot of potential as we continue to be laser focused on providing best customer experience, broadest selection, lowest prices, fast, convenient delivery, while working on our cost structure to have the right long-term business.
Shelley, I understand Chassis is optimistic, as are all of these CEOs when interviewed, and they have to make a statement about the mess they're in. Anyway, but my previous comment about focusing on grocery is really an important question because, and by the way, the replacement of Clark is Doug Harrington,
right?
Who does have, I would say, an indirect background in retail, at least in legacy retail, but most of it could be considered grocery.
Right.
And at this point, Shelley, can you break down the number of physical stores that Jassy closed, and what product categories, and what is left for the physical stores?
Of course. So Amazon US has 511 Whole Foods Market stores, 23 Amazon Fresh grocery stores, currently 24 Amazon Go convenience stores, 24 Amazon bookstores, 33 Amazon 4-star outlets, which, by the way, I never liked that store, and 9 Amazon pop-up locations. So Amazon's closing 68 brick and mortar retail stores across the US, UK, and that includes all the bookstores, all the pop-up shops, and the 4-star stores.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic, isn't it, that they're closing their bookstores. Somebody told me that early on Bezos offered, the big chain.
Barnes and Noble?
Yes, Barnes and Noble, to acquire them. And guess what? Had that taken place, he would not have had to build out his own bookstores, which, by the way, are failing. And, that's one of the reasons Jassy, it's really ironic, all of this, because they did become the biggest bookseller in the world online.
Right.
Anyway, so I guess they are going to give Amazon Style a go, which is their apparel specialty stores. I think they launched 2 of them, and I think they're opening a little later on. So I think I wrote about this. I think we talked about it. I don't believe it's going to make it because they don't have enough of a consumer experience in terms of it's all tech driven, and you sit in a fitting room and you punch buttons and get stuff sent to the fitting room. I know it sounds weird, and I don't think they're going to make it, but Harrington, who is Clark's replacement, what experience does he have in retail?
Well, he's the news. So they changed the title. He's now the CEO of Worldwide Amazon Stores. That's the new title.
Stores, not consumer.
Yeah, they took out the word consumer. And Robin, notice they're replacing that consumer with stores. So that might be a signal of Jassy's commitment to making the physical store a business that is actually going to be successful. But Doug's been at Amazon for 17 years, and he comes from the consumables business. He's the one that launched Amazon Fresh in 2007. He also launched Prime Pantry, which was built in 2017. It closed 7 years later. In 2015, he led the North American consumer business. And prior to Amazon, he was vice president of a .com grocer called Webvan, which only lasted 3 years.
There you go.
They're also moving John Felton. He's going to run operations, and he'll report to Doug. So all operations will fall under John Felton, along with there's 8 other senior executives, one of which is the head of physical stores. His name is Tony Hoget. And as you might recall this, he was hired, Robin, last year by Amazon from Tesco, where he spent
Oh.
31 years. So
Wow.
these indicators, plus what stores are being opened and which ones are being closed, lead me to believe Amazon's going to go big after physical grocery stores.
Well, there you go, Shelley. Tony Hogan, 31 years at Tesco to head up physical stores. Tesco, of course, as most people know, is a giant grocery chain. I think they're number 2 or 3 in the world, are they not?
Yeah, they're up there, certainly.
Yeah. And this may be another strong signal, that Jassy is going to focus on grocery. And guess what? Who is the number 1 grocer in the United States? You got it, Walmart. Ha, ha, ha. And Shelley, what about the workforce issues at Amazon? I know you've done a lot of looking into that along with these big management shifts.
I mean, Robin, the bigger concern for Amazon, in my opinion, is the amount of turnover and attrition that the company has had. It's just churning through its workforce at a very, very high rate.
Yeah, and I read with the announcement of Doug Harrington as CEO of Worldwide Amazon Stores, that 2 other executives resigned. Alicia Bowler Davis, who was SVP of Global Customer Fulfillment, and she is leaving Amazon after just 3 years of leading the company's sprawling fulfillment network, which, as we know, is sprawling even larger than they wanted. David Bozeman, a VP of Amazon Transportation Services, is also departing. And by the way, Alicia Bowler Davis and David Bozeman are 2 of the most senior Black executives at Amazon. Bowler Davis was the only executive on Amazon's top leadership council, the so-called S team. In 2021, the company lost at least 50 people at the VP level or higher.
Wow.
In part due to low pay and competitive offers elsewhere.
That's a big loss. I mean, Bowler Davis was the one who was supposed to, she was being groomed to replace Clark.
Really?
So
Yeah.
maybe that's why she left. And
Maybe.
the employment practices and turnover are going to be the Achilles heel for Amazon for sure. Amazon's churning through its labor at a very fast rate. Turnover was 123% in 2019.
Oh, stop it. Wait. I think the average turnover in the average mainstream retail is something like 70%. And you said 123%.
Well, that's just in 2019. That's pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Wait till you hear what numbers coming next. So when you compare the 123, not to retail, but say transportation and warehousing, that's 46%. So it's almost triple what transportation and warehouse. In 2020, the attrition rate jumped to 159% at Amazon.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So,
Okay.
and the warehouse sector was about 59%. So this high turnover coupled with Amazon's current, what we would call employment practices, they make a good case for unionization efforts.
Oh, yeah.
What we're seeing, right? So it's interesting because Bezos thought turnover was a good thing. He's always said that long-term employees are less productive and would lead a march toward mediocrity. That's his philosophy. It always has been. Now, though, he wants Amazon to be Earth's greatest employer. So the employment practices used by Amazon drive its turnover, most notably these productivity quotas, these negative time banks that actually subtract time back away from workers if they're unproductive, stringent attendance policies, high injury rates, and really a lack of culture and focus on the HR side of the business. If Amazon put as much emphasis and resources on its employment practices as it does building out its logistics network, it would be first greatest employer.
Wow. You know, Shelley, I think you landed on perhaps Amazon's biggest issue, the culture. If Bezos' belief that turnover is a good thing spread throughout and deep into the organization, it places, you know, enormous pressure on all the workers and really can lead to instability, which is what we might be witnessing across the enterprise in real time.
That's right.
I remember Mike Gould, former CEO of Bloomingdale's, told me that culture will eat strategy for breakfast every day, meaning that some companies may have the greatest strategies and the greatest business model, but if the culture is such that it's not like one big team, culture went out. Doesn't matter what your strategies are. So Jassy's inherited an overflowing plate of issues, but I do believe that he is a professional business manager, and maybe he is the right guy in the nick of time. So Shelley, it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, Jassy's in a tough spot. He's dealing with decisions made when he was not CEO, but he's going to be certainly accountable for the turnaround. And here's something you'll find really interesting. 1 week before Clark left the company, he laid out his 3-year strategic plan to the board and to the leadership team on how Amazon could get out of the mess that they're currently in. So let's see if Harrington executes to Clark's plan or if he develops a new one to right the ship.
Well, you know, Shelley, just one last remark on that. Maybe Jassy looked at his strategic plan and maybe he said to Clark, you know, David, why don't you go enjoy yourself for the rest of your life? Jassy may see the need to develop a different strategy. Anyway.
Yeah,
we'll
I don't think Jassy begged him to stay. That's all I'll say. For our listeners, you can find more of our podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Buzzsprout, and therobinreport.com. And look for us on YouTube, where we broadcast our podcast as well. And please follow us on social media, link in with us, and follow us on Twitter for the latest thoughts about the industry.
And of course, I want to thank our audience again for joining us. And as I mention every Friday, if any of you have a topic that you would like Shelley and I to cover, just send me an email to robin@therobinreport.com. And thanks again.